If you dance this waltz, I'll marry my son to you. Billionaire mocked, followed by a wave of cruel laughter echoing through the hall. The women covered their mouths, pretending to be shocked but clearly enjoying the spectacle. The air in the Thompson Holdings ballroom was thick with the scent of money, old whiskey, and expensive perfume. The sound of glasses clinking and polite laughter created a pleasant hum, a symphony of success. But that hum was brutally interrupted by the deafening crash of crystal shattering on marble. 200 heads turned in unison, a silent, judgmental wave. Every eye in the room fell on her. Kesha Williams, 35, a contract cleaner who had only been on the job for 3 weeks, was on her knees. Her dark skin stood in stark contrast to the brilliant white floor, and her trembling hands were reaching for the shards of glass. A single tear of mortification traced a path down her cheek, but it wasn't from the broken tray. It was from the laughter that followed. If you dance this waltz, I'll marry my son to you. The voice belonged to William Thompson III, his words dripping with contempt as he pointed a champagne flute at her. He sneered, a cruel performance for all of Manhattan's elite. Dad, you're being ridiculous. Jonathan Thompson, his 28-year-old son, whispered, his face burning with embarrassment. William ignored him, his eyes sparkling with cruel amusement. He was drunk on power and the $1,000 whiskey he'd been drinking all night. No, let me finish, he declared, walking to the center of the room as if presiding over a court of law. This person obviously doesn't have the coordination to clean properly. How about we test her to see if she can even move to the beat? Kesha remained on the floor, collecting the shards. But a subtle shift happened in her eyes. It wasn't humiliation or fear. It was a cold, deep calm, as if she were evaluating not the situation, but the man himself. The event manager, a nervous man in a slick suit, tried to intervene. Perhaps it would be better nothing. William cut him off with a dramatic wave of his hand. Play a waltz. If she can dance better than my wife, I'll marry my son to her on the spot. Just imagine the heir to the Thompson fortune marrying the cleaning lady. A wave of cruel laughter echoed through the hall. The women covered their mouths, pretending to be shocked but clearly enjoying the spectacle. The men shook their heads, as if this were a perfectly acceptable comedy of bad taste. Kesha finally stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked directly at William, and the room fell silent. I accept, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a sharp blade. The orchestra, which had been preparing to play, stopped in confusion. William blinked, thinking he had misheard. What did you say? He asked, his arrogance momentarily shaken. I said, I accept your challenge, Kesha repeated, a subtle smile touching her lips. But when I dance better than your wife, you will keep your word, even if it was said as a joke. The crowd began to laugh again, louder this time, thinking they were about to witness the biggest embarrassment of the decade. They didn't see the familiar gleam in Kesha's eyes, the same gleam that had once mesmerized audiences on the world's most prestigious stages, the same gleam that had been snuffed out by a single night of tragedy. If this story of prejudice and twists and turns arouse your curiosity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what is about to happen in that ballroom will show that underestimating someone can be the most costly mistake a person ever makes. A 50-year-old woman known for her ballroom dancing lessons glided over to Kesha. Darling, do you really think I need to lower myself to compete with this? She said, her voice a condescending hiss. Don't be modest, Victoria, William replied, clearly enjoying his wife's indignation. You won that club waltz trophy last year. That should be more than enough for this demonstration. Kesha watched them silently, but her mind had already traveled back 15 years. She was no longer a cleaner in a faded uniform. She was Kesha Morrow, principal soloist with the American National Ballet. She remembered the feeling of flying across the stage, the thunder of applause, the critics who compared her to the greatest ballerinas in history. It all ended in a car accident on the way home from a performance for the political elite. 3 months in a coma, the cruel awakening to a new reality. Her legs would never be the same. The doctor said she would be lucky to walk normally again. Dance professionally? Impossible. The memory of that pain was a constant, familiar ghost. "Jonathan," William said, turning to his son, "go get your camera. I want to record this moment for posterity. The day a cleaning lady tried to pass herself off as a dancer at my event." Jonathan hesitated, his hands clenched at his sides. "Dad, this has gone too far. She was just doing her job. She accepted the challenge, and now she's going to entertain us," William snapped. "Or would you rather I tell your girlfriend about that embarrassing situation last week?" Jonathan's face paled. The sight of his son's submission made William's chest swell with a toxic satisfaction. Kesha realized this wasn't about her at all. It was just another act of toxic control. "Put the music on," William ordered the DJ, "and place your bets. $500 for those who bet on my wife. 1,000 for those brave enough to bet on the employee." Cruel laughter filled the air as guests pulled out their wallets. Victoria positioned herself in the center of the dance floor, doing a few theatrical stretches to show off her supposed expertise. William approached Kesha with a wicked smile. "When you lose, and you will lose, I want you to get down on your knees and apologize for wasting everyone's time. And then, obviously, you're fired." It was in that moment that Kesha's composure shifted. The deep calm was replaced by a familiar fire. It was the same determination that had led her to dance on international stages. The same strength that had made her fight through months of physical therapy just to walk again. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice even and calm, "when I win, and I will win, I want you to keep your word about the marriage. But I also want something else." William's eyebrows shot up in amusement. "Oh, she wants to make demands now. Very well. Amuse me. What else do you want besides marrying my son?" "I want you to admit in front of all these guests that you judged a woman wrongly based on the color of her skin and the work she does," Kesha replied. "And I want a public apology." The room tensed. William's laughter was loud and mocking. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. All right, I accept. But when you make a fool of yourself, you'll leave here not only without a job, but without any dignity left." What William didn't know was that Kesha had nothing left to lose. And a woman who had already lost everything and rebuilt her life was a far more dangerous opponent than he could ever imagine. While Victoria warmed up with her basic ballroom moves, Kesha stood motionless in a corner. Her mind, however, was a precision machine. The 15 years of brutal physical therapy, of learning to walk and then to dance again in secret, had forged a resilience none of these pampered guests could understand. "Look at her," a guest whispered. "She's probably never stepped on a dance floor in her life." Kesha noticed that Jonathan wasn't laughing. He shifted uneasily, avoiding the crowd's gaze. It was then she realized she had seen him before. He was the young executive who always treated the contract workers with respect. A low voice spoke beside her. "Miss." She turned to see a black man in his 60s, wearing the uniform of the building's security team. "I'm Marcus, head of security," he murmured, pretending to check his radio. "I've worked here for 20 years. I saw you dance before, 15 years ago at the National Theater." Kesha Morrow, principal soloist. "I was security there, too." Kesha's heart raced. After years of anonymous survival, someone had recognized her. "I thought you died in the accident," Marcus continued, a mixture of shock and admiration in his eyes. "The newspapers said a lot of things," she replied, her voice steady. Marcus nodded slowly. "What they did to you was an injustice. And what they're doing now," he glanced at William, who was still loudly humiliating her, "is even worse." In that moment, Kesha made a decision she had been putting off for 15 years. It wasn't just about dancing. It was about reclaiming her identity. "Marcus, I need a favor. After I dance, I need you to record everything that follows, especially the reactions." He looked at her, confused, but nodded. "Sure. But why?" Kesha smiled for the first time that night. "Because some people need to be reminded that underestimating someone based on their appearance can be the most expensive mistake of their lives." William, meanwhile, was making the spectacle even more cruel. "Let's make this more interesting," he bellowed. If she finishes the song without falling or stopping, I'll give her $1,000. But when she fails, she cleans this entire room on her knees. A few uncomfortable murmurs rose from the crowd. Jonathan tried again. Dad, this has gone too far. Shut up, Jonathan. You're too soft. People like her need to know their place. It was then that Kesha began to move, not to position herself, but to stretch. The movements were subtle, almost imperceptible, but Marcus recognized them immediately. They were the preparatory exercises she did before every performance at the National Theater. My God, he muttered to himself. She's really going to do it. Victoria stepped to the center of the dance floor. Start the music, she ordered. The DJ, clearly uncomfortable, put on a classical waltz. Victoria danced alone, her movements competent but predictable, the result of expensive private lessons, not years of dedication. She received polite applause. Well done, dear, William said, applauding with exaggerated fanfare. Now for our guest artist. Kesha walked slowly to the center of the floor. Each step was measured, controlled, imbued with a dignity that made some of the guests shift nervously. This was not how a defeated person was supposed to behave. What song would you like? The DJ asked out of politeness. The same one, Kesha replied simply. But from the beginning. William laughed. Oh, she wants a second chance. How lovely. What they didn't know was that this was no random choice. It was the same waltz she had danced on the last night of her career, the performance that had earned a 5-minute standing ovation. The music began, and with it, something extraordinary happened. Kesha closed her eyes and allowed the notes to take her back. She remembered the feeling of flying across the stage, the deep connection with each musical note, the absolute certainty that she had been born to do this. The doctors had said she would never dance again, but she had never stopped dancing in secret, alone, in the quiet moments of her new life. Her hands positioned themselves with a precision that made the orchestra members frown. Her first movements were subtle, but as the music gained momentum, each step became more fluid, each turn more precise, each movement charged with a profound emotion. William Thompson's laughter died on his lips. Victoria's smile vanished. They weren't watching a cleaning lady trying to dance. They were witnessing an artist reclaiming her place in the world. Kesha executed a sequence of flawless pirouettes, followed by a grand jeté that lifted her into the air with a lightness that defied gravity. This was not ballroom dancing. This was classical ballet of the highest order, masterfully adapted to the waltz. Marcus, his promise kept, discreetly recorded the performance and the reactions of the crowd, especially William Thompson, whose face had gone from scorn to confusion, then to pure terror. This is impossible, William whispered, his voice catching, as Kesha performed her trademark sequence, a unique fusion of classical techniques. The truth began to dawn on the audience. A woman in the crowd, a patron of the arts, gasped. I know those moves. I've seen that sequence before. But where? When the music reached its climax, Kesha performed a series of fouettes, continuous turns on one leg that left the entire room speechless. The music came to an end, and she finished in a pose that was simultaneously powerful and vulnerable, her head held high with absolute dignity. The silence that followed was a tangible thing. Then one person began to applaud, then another. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, a deafening wave of applause shaking the windows. William Thompson was pale as a ghost, utterly humiliated in front of Manhattan's elite, who now looked at him with a mixture of disapproval and embarrassment. It was then that Marcus approached Kesha, still recording. Ladies and gentlemen, he said loudly, allow me to introduce Kesha Morrow, former principal soloist with the American National Ballet. The name echoed like a bomb. Gasps and exclamations rippled through the hall. Kesha Morrow was a legend, a ballerina who had mysteriously disappeared at the height of her career. Impossible, Victoria Thompson stammered. Kesha Morrow is dead. Or at least she never danced again. Clearly, Kesha said, her voice steady and calm. The rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. The crowd laughed, but William was not amused. The reality of his public humiliation was hitting him like a freight train. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said, holding up his phone, "you said that if she danced better than your wife, you would marry her to your son. I believe this audience can attest that the condition has been more than met." Jonathan approached Kesha, his face full of sincere apology. "Miss Morrow, I would like to publicly apologize for my father's behavior. It was inexcusable." "Jonathan, shut up," William exploded, his mask of control finally slipping completely. "You will not apologize to anyone, especially not to her." It was then that Kesha revealed the true extent of her plan. "Mr. Thompson," she said calmly, "I believe we have a marriage proposal to discuss. A man of your standing surely keeps his word, doesn't he? You must be crazy if you think I'm going to honor a drunken joke." William growled, his arrogance returning in the form of desperation. "Ah, but it wasn't a joke," Kesha smiled. "Marcus, could you play back the recording of Mr. Thompson's statements from tonight?" Marcus held the phone high as William's voice filled the room, clearly stating the terms of the bet, the conditions, and the humiliations he had proposed. "That's blackmail," William shouted, completely losing his composure. "No," Kesha corrected calmly. "This is accountability. You made a public bet with clear terms in front of 200 witnesses. Now you have to decide if your reputation is worth less than your prejudice." Jonathan stepped closer to Kesha. "Miss Morrow, if you will allow me, I would like to honor my father's word. Not because I am forced to, but because any man would be honored to marry someone of your talent and dignity." William was visibly shaking with rage. "Jonathan, if you do this, you're out of the company, out of the family, out of everything." "Then so be it," Jonathan replied, extending his hand to Kesha. "Some things are more important than money, Dad, like having integrity." Kesha looked at his hand, then at William, who was having what looked like a public breakdown. "Mr. Thompson," she said, 15 years ago, people like you decided I had no value after I became imperfect. Today, you tried to humiliate me based on the color of my skin and the work I do to survive. But I've learned something. True nobility doesn't come from inheritance or bank accounts. It comes from how we treat other human beings when we think no one is watching." She turned to Jonathan. "Your son seems to have learned that lesson despite your best efforts. As for the proposal," she smiled, "I'll accept dinner with him, but marriage? That's something two people decide together, based on love and respect, not humiliating bets." The audience erupted in applause again, this time for Kesha's dignity and wisdom. William, defeated, muttered something about lawyers and stormed out of the hall, followed by a mortified Victoria. "This is going to be very interesting when it hits social media," Marcus said with a grin, stopping the recording. Marcus's recording spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours, "Millionaire Humiliates Legendary Ballerina" was a worldwide trending topic, racking up millions of views. The next morning, William Thompson III woke up to discover his company had lost $3 million in contracts overnight. His partners were demanding his resignation. "Dad," Jonathan said, finding his father in his office surrounded by newspapers with devastating headlines. "The board has voted. You have 1 hour to resign or you will be removed." "You did this?" William murmured, seeing not a son, but a betrayal. "No," Jonathan replied calmly. "You betrayed yourself the moment you decided your arrogance was worth more than your humanity." Meanwhile, Kesha was bombarded with offers. 3 international ballet companies wanted her to choreograph. Lincoln Center called with an offer for a solo event. But the offer that touched her most came from the children at the community school where she had taught before. They had pooled their savings, $23 in all, to offer her a scholarship to return to teaching. "I'll take it," Kesha said tearfully, "but on one condition. Let's turn this into something bigger." 6 months later, the Kesha Morrow Center for the Arts opened in the heart of Manhattan. Funded by donations that poured in from around the world, it was a testament to her resilience. Jonathan Thompson, now running a completely revamped family business focused on social responsibility, was the first major donor. William Thompson had lost everything. His company, his reputation, his family. Victoria had filed for divorce. He was last seen working as a low-level consultant, a shadow of the arrogant man who once was. You know what impresses me most about this whole story? Marcus said at the center's opening, watching Kesha teach a class of diverse, smiling children. It wasn't just a victory over prejudice. It was a lesson in how true nobility responds to cruelty. Kesha, now recognized as one of the greatest artists of her generation, smiled. Sometimes, she said, we have to lose everything to discover who we really are. And sometimes people have to lose everything to learn who they should never have tried to be. Jonathan approached, carrying flowers. Ready for dinner? He asked, offering his arm to Kesha. Ready? She replied, accepting not only his arm, but the new life she had built on the ashes of her old one. Kesha's true revenge wasn't destroying William Thompson. It was building something so beautiful and inspiring that his cruelty seemed insignificant in comparison. She proved that when we face prejudice with dignity and respond to hatred with excellence, we don't just win, we transform the world around us. What about you? Have you ever dealt with someone who attempted, out of bias, to crush your dreams? Leave a comment with your story and follow the channel for more tales that demonstrate that being exceptional is the best way to respond to people who undervalue us.